Morning, Dr. Fuller.
Good morning, Mr. Brown. How are you today?
Better than I deserve.
Another exciting day on Coffee with Rich.
Absolutely. Well, I think a Monday sit rep with Rich and TC. So,
Oh, that sounds very official.
the old Monday sit rep.
I feel smarter already.
I know, right? We would have a Monday morning. We'd have a Friday night out brief for the command group, and then Monday morning we'd do just a quick huddle and kick it off unless we were flying, and then we'd huddle at the airport. But yeah, man, those Monday morning sit reps are important.
Yeah, who's on the blotter report? Who you got to pick up from lockout from the brig? Yeah,
that's a sergeant major problem, man. That ain't the officer problem. Unless you're a company commander like you were, Dr. Fuller, then it's your problem.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time as a infantry platoon leader at different MP stations around Germany, picking up troops.
God bless them. That's what they do, right?
That's what they do.
Yeah, when I was a platoon commander as a staff sergeant, we didn't have enough officers, so they made the mistake of making old Rich Brown platoon commander. Guess who my platoon sergeant was?
Don't tell me Mike Seeklander.
Mr. Mike Seeklander. Yep. And sure enough, man, if I gave him, a pass going to the Ville on a Saturday night, guess who was bailing them out Sunday morning?
Yep. Well, and I, of course, like I'm sure you did, I always made sure that all the NCOs in their chain of command were going with me because I'm like, look, if I'm up at 4 a.m. going to an MP station 40 clicks away, I'm not going alone, boys.
No. Man, we got a lot of folks jumping on. Thank you to the 10 folks watching us live. You can find this content on the YouTube page, or you can watch us on Facebook Live. You can find this content. Yeah, Will Rhodes is on from Missouri. He has coin number 2269. John Shriver out there in Yukon, Oklahoma, coin number 1919. Guile Jackson out there in the Philippines says, who has a better beard, Rich or TC? I'm partial to mine.
Right now, I think you got me. I had to trim mine up for that executive protection gig last week. So
somebody's got to make the big bucks, right?
That's right. Stand by the door.
Yeah. Tony is on, says, good morning, folks. Alan Kelly is up there, 1571. My brother Jeff Brown says, good morning. I hope you all are doing well. Nice to see you, Dr. Fuller. Craig Holland is on. Johnny King out there in Kentucky. What is this coin number, Dr. Fuller, I keep hearing about?
1620, baby. It's the cool kid symbol of membership. It signifies that you have the good taste and sense to join the American Warrior Society and access all they have to offer.
There's my coin number.
Oh, look at you.
This February of 2014 is when we started, Dr. Fuller. So it's 10 years in the making, brother.
Wow. I have to go back and look at when my very first interview with Mike was on the podcast, and it's been 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, it's been a
you
minute.
guys were a well-established force of media back then. I can't imagine what your reach is now. Move over, Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah, I want to be the Larry King of the tactical community. That's my goal here.
Well, just don't start wearing suspenders. They're done. They're played.
Are they?
Yeah, you got to go with a different, some other sartorial decision that makes it yours.
I'm working on it. I'm trying to bring turtlenecks back.
A tactical turtleneck.
Yeah. Let's see. We got a great show for you this morning. Thank you to the 14 folks watching us live. Please hit that share button. Dr. Fuller, before we get into today's show, everybody should know who you are, but Dr. Fuller is a retired FBI agent and the author of No Safe Alternative, Improving How We Teach Cops to Kill. And if that title sounds outstanding, then you should pick up a book. Where can they go to find some of your books, whether it's that or Painting Over Rust, Stories from a 20-Year Odyssey?
Either one's available on Amazon. Easiest way to do it. Or you can DM me directly and I can sign it for you and inscribe it as a lovely Christmas gift and stocking stuffer. Either one will work. You can get them from my website. You can get me, or you can get me through here. It's I'm not well hidden in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just want it quickly, hit Amazon up and they'll make sure Jeff Bezos gets paid.
And the AMA, the American Medical Association, has just put out a study that says reading my book on violence and varietals will raise your testosterone by at least 10 points. So if you're looking to raise that testosterone, chase mom around the house, pick up a copy of On Violence and Varietals.
I read that study. It was surprising. It was surprising it was only 10%. That's the surprise.
I know, right? My lovely bride, Miss Lisa, is on. Mark Ruddle out there in Australia is on. Good morning, sir. Will Parker, coin number 800, is on. Let's jump into the show, Dr. Fuller. Monday morning sit rep.
Yeah, everybody ready for a depressant? Here we go.
Remember, when it comes to like keeping you guys informed, it's all about, like I told my lovely bride the other day, I said, my job, I see it is kind of hop the periscope up every now and then, look around and then go back down. You know what I mean? It's not to immerse myself in it, but just pop up, take a look, come back down and prepare a little bit more, whether that's preparing with buying more food, make sure we got adequate water supplies. We're going to put in a garden, you know what I'm saying, TC? So lots of ways you can prepare.
It's true. My wife is very good at putting in the garden. The maintenance piece seems to fall on the help. So
yeah, I hear you. On that one, brother. Once again, please like and share. I want to start with, I think we got 5 issues to discuss this morning. Our good friend, Mr. Will Wood, is feeling a little under the weather this morning. So Dr. Fuller was kind enough to jump in. So I apologize if you came here for his outstanding economic content. We'll have to get you caught up next week when Will is feeling a little bit better. But so Dr. Fuller and I are going to talk about 5 primary issues. The first one being the 2024 election, potentially the most contentious election definitely in our lifetime, if not the last 160 years. What do you think?
Yeah, it's what it's shaping up to be. It's a little disconcerting, frankly, because I have predicted in the past, a year or two ago, that we were not looking at a civil war anytime soon in this country. But man, I really hope I was right about that. Because these folks seem to be really, really, really getting upset, and they're pulling all kinds of stunts. I mean, I read something the other day that said there was 91 current indictments on the former president.
Yeah,
that's not weaponizing DOJ against political enemies. I don't know, what your definition thereof is, and it should be cause for concern regardless of your political stripe, because what is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. And if you think that this is not part of our political reality going forward, you're just not paying attention, because this is exactly what the other side's going to do in the future.
I can't believe there hasn't been articles of impeachment already prepared against the sitting president. What say you?
Yeah, that seems to be the thing, right? We've had we had Nixon and Jackson, and then all of a sudden we impeach a sitting president twice.
Mm-hmm.
And why it hasn't happened again, I don't know. When they're going to start trying to keep Biden off of various ballots. I suppose that they don't have to worry about running a primary, but it's going to happen. And this is what we're going to have to go through every single time. Remember, we didn't have court challenges to elections until Al Gore decided to do it. And now we have them all the time. I mean, they're constant at the local and state level.
Yeah.
It's just,
I don't know if this is just a byproduct when you have a nation of laws that you have this overly litigious society. I mean, your wife's an attorney. Maybe she could tell us about that. But
well, I mean, I've read in the past that we have more lawyers in Washington, D.C. than they have in the entire country of Japan.
Wow.
Just as an example of what you're saying, we have a lot of attorneys with, a lot of legal knowledge, and they're very good at throwing word salad at things.
Mm-hmm. And
at some point, they get bored, right? You got to have something to do. You got to have something to set yourself out from the hoi polloi.
Yeah.
We've had people sitting on Capitol Hill for 200 years passing laws every year. I mean, At some point, you're just going to get into the weeds so deep that it's kind of ridiculous. And we're there, and these are some creative, intelligent people, whether we like them or not, whether we agree with them or not. And they're going to come up with creative, intelligent ways to attack their political enemies, because that's not about what's in the best interest for the country anymore, from my perception. What seems to be the primary concern is re-election. And how do we activate our base? And how do we keep the other guy out of office? Because let's be honest, the way things have gone in the last 4 years, if they didn't do this sort of thing to former President Trump, I don't know that they could have a prayer of stopping him from getting elected. I mean, whether you like the guy or you don't like the guy, the current president has made such a dog's breakfast of the economy and the border and international relations. I mean, he's just done a bad job, which shouldn't surprise anybody. You've put a man with, if he isn't completely demented or senile, he's senile adjacent at this point. I don't say that as a slight on the man.
No.
He's just old.
If we live that long, it's heading for all of us, right?
Right. He's simply old, and they knew that when they ran him, and they've known that ever since he got in office, and it shouldn't be any surprise that this is what happens.
Yeah.
The Russians, the Chinese aren't stupid. They can see it, and they're going to act in their best interests, which oftentimes are counter to our best interests. And we see that playing out all over the world. Anyhow, I've gotten a little off your original topic there.
No, I mean, I think today's the day to go to take this where we need to take it. Ted Leonard is on, coin number 1461. Happy to be here. Guile says, must be depressed because Carl Weathers has passed away. 80s icon. Yeah, that's a damn shame.
Yeah.
He was a good man. Sean is on, says, hi, TC, and you too, Rich.
Right here in North Kakalaki.
Hope you're doing well, sir. Tina is on from South Carolina. Tony says, TC, thoughts on Article 5 Convention of States?
You'd be hard pressed to fly that one. I mean, I think you could get it in some states, you just wouldn't get it in others.
No, I don't see that happening. It would be interesting, but not going to happen. That is a convention to propose an amendment or amendments. And you need 2/3 of the states present to do that. And that would 434 states or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah.
You couldn't get it for equal rights, and there's a widespread support for that. So yeah. I don't know that you would get it for something as this politically contentious.
Yeah. Will Parker says something along the lines of 75% of attorneys in the world and 94% of civil lawsuits. Whoa. Yeah. That's
we're number one. We're number one.
Yeah, so I wanted to show everybody this map, issue number 1. And so if you're looking at it here, the dark states are where lawsuits have been filed in order to keep the 45th president off the ballot. Then you have the kind of a brown colored decisions ruled that Trump is ineligible pending appeal. So we got Maine and Colorado. Cases dismissed by lower courts there in the light green, and then the dark green cases to try to keep Trump, the 45th president, off the ballot. I hate saying President Trump because that term comes with so much baggage. Whether you saw him on The Apprentice and just didn't like him, you didn't like him as a president, you didn't like the grab him by the crotch comment. Let's say the 45th president of the United States and move on. So these are attempts to keep the 45th president out of office permanently. And of course, the basis for that is a little known clause in the 14th Amendment, Section 3. And I'll read it here. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States, this is the big one here, that's why I put it in red, or as a member of any state legislature or executive or judicial officer of the state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of the House, remove such disability. Now, what does all that mean? Well, we're going to kind of look into this. Before we get back to the 14th Amendment, I just want to kind of put a pin in that. Parking lot that idea. This is what they're trying to use to disqualify the 45th president from ever holding office again. And as you know, Dr. Fuller, this amendment was put in place after the Civil War to keep former Confederate officers from ever holding office again, right?
Right. Unless, of course, we like him, and then we can get 2/3 of the Congress to say he's an okay guy. But yeah, that was the idea.
And James Longstreet, at the behest of General Grant, James Longstreet, of course, was one of Robert E. Lee's corps commanders. And I think he had been ran for office before the Civil War. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, him and General Lee were buddies. And he says, look, go to President Andrew Johnson. I've been talking to him, see if he'll give you amnesty so I have some potential things for you to do in the future here as an officer in the government. And so he goes to Andrew Johnson, and Andrew Johnson says, look, pal, there are 3 people that will never get amnesty as long as I'm alive. You, General Lee, and who was the third guy? He said, Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederate States. And Will Parker says Longstreet was damn brilliant. Yes, he was. But he ended up serving in several capacities. James Longstreet did as an envoy for the United States and maybe a low-level ambassador and things of this nature. Did a lot to try to bring the southern states back into the fold, but as far as I know, was never given that amnesty that he wanted.
Yeah, it's interesting that, well, in fairness to you, by the way, referring to the 45th president as President Trump is correct. Just like we have, once you've been elected president, you get that title forever. I understand what you're saying, though, as far as keeping him. It's just interesting to me that they want to keep him out, but they'll let, I don't know, Ilhan Omar serve all day long, right? And others of her ilk that make treasonous statements, in my mind, at least.
100%.
Daily. So,
yeah.
But honestly, what good is a double standard if you don't enforce it, right?
I know, right? I've been saying it for years. Hey, thank you to the 17 folks watching us live. Please hit the share button, man. We're still talking about issue number 1. We got 4 more to go. But let's talk about the second Trump impeachment. So you have the January 6th electoral justice protest that may have gotten out of hand, just saying. So on January the 10th, our good friend Nancy Pelosi formally requested representatives' input as to whether to pursue Section 3 disqualification of the outgoing president because of his role in the January 6th Capitol protest. On January the 13th, the majority of the House representatives voted to impeach Trump for incitement of insurrection. However, at the Senate impeachment trial, they voted, February the 13th, that he was guilty, but fell short of the 2/3 majority required to convict him. So I say that as a precursor to what qualifies as having done this. And so he didn't get convicted. Does that mean that Article 14 doesn't trip? And there are legal scholars that say that it's irrelevant whether that had happened or not. And let's look at this. So this coming Thursday, Dr. Fuller, February the 8th, the Supreme Court will consider whether Section 3 of the 14th Amendment precludes President Trump, the 40th president, from appearing on Colorado's ballot. I think this is Trump v. Anderson is the actual brief that they're going to be hearing. What's important about this is Super Tuesday, the day Colorado and 14 other states, along with American Samoa, hold their primaries, is March the 5th, which is just under 1 month of SCOTA having heard the oral argument. So my concern is, will they have us a verdict in time? What do you think?
I think they will have a verdict. I think they fully recognize the importance of this decision. I just have a hard time with a lot of this. I recognize it's the law and we're going to abide by it, and that's fine. But, it's 30 days between the decision to impeach and coming up with whether or not they're going to impeach. That's awful quick. SCOTUS is going to ram this through fast, I think. I think they'll make a decision fast. But either way, that decision is going to upset somebody. There will be people that are, potentially violently upset over the decision, no matter which way it jumps. But I think, yes, we will have a decision in time for this. I mean, we've seen in the past how fast SCOTUS can get around and make things happen when they need to.
Yeah. And I'm glad they're taking this, but it's prompted a few people to file amicus briefs with the Supreme Court. And one of the ones that were filed was between Edwin Meese, believe it or not, he's still alive. I know, and William Barr, both former U.S. attorneys generals, and they contend that, quote, whatever one thinks of the behavior of former President Trump in the wake of the 2020 election, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment does not disqualify him from the presidential ballot, end quote. Another brief by 3 election law scholars and lawyers urged the court to decide one way or the other whether Trump is eligible to appear on the ballot rather than just resolving the case on some other ground. The failure to decide whether Trump is eligible under Section 3, the brief cautions, would mark and I'm quoting here, mark a dangerous refusal by the court to do its duty, end quote, and, quote, risk political instability not seen since the Civil War. Is that hyperbole, Dr. Fuller?
No. It's not. I mean, good Lord, if you look around now, we've got social ills not seen since the Civil War. This would just pour gas on that fire. And for those that don't kind of understand what he's saying there, that brief says, in essence, make the decision as to whether or not he can be on the ballot. Don't say, well, you don't have standing or you missed a comma on page 2, so we're not going to, make a decision based on this substandard brief you filed. I mean, there's a lot of ways they can wiggle out of it because, again, they're smart people. They're lawyers. They're very good at throwing word salad at you. And, it's really going to sadly be overly influenced, I think, by political factors rather than just a strict four corners interpretation of the law and the relevant precedents. What relevant precedents we have. But it's going to get spicy. I mean, there's just no way around it. I mean, we've seen that the political left is more than happy to take to the streets and burn things to the ground when they don't get their way. Like a large group of 2-year-olds throwing a tantrum with Molotovs. I just don't think that the right is going to ignore that forever. I think the right is going to come take to the streets and do the exact same thing here pretty soon. My question is, how long until we have full-blown riots between honest-to-God fascists and honest-to-God communists out in the streets, like the Weimar Republic saw? And this decision by the Supreme Court is, in my mind, a seriously significant potential flashpoint for that very thing.
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Fuller. I agree with everything you just said, 100%. You're spot on as always. Donald Green is on it says running late from occupied Virginia. Again, going back to our Civil War discussion. Sean has something interesting here. Dr. Fuller, he says SCOTUS decision will be unanimous in Trump's favor. It will say, quote, if you want to exclude him, you have to try him and convict him of insurrection, but we make no judgment on whether insurrection occurred. What do you think about that?
Well, Sean's a pretty smart guy. When he talks, I tend to listen. His jokes are hysterical.
You hear that, Sean?
Yeah, but Sean, I know Sean, and he has a considered opinion, and I would tend to agree with him. But I also point out we live in a day of red flag laws, right, where they think it's perfectly acceptable to ignore the law and just sort of, we don't need to try anybody, we don't need to convict anybody, we don't need to charge anybody. We're just going to take their Second Amendment guaranteed firearms. This would obviously be something different, but in my mind, similar. I think he's right. Whether or not they make a decision on whether insurrection has occurred, I think is part and parcel of making that decision, right? If they say he can or cannot appear on the ballot, you've in essence decided as to whether or not he's guilty under the Constitution, at least, of insurrection. I don't know that they're going to say he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That needs to be decided at a lower trial. I agree with Sean in that regard.
I don't know about unanimous, but we'll see.
You kind of hope. We've, for whatever reason, in the past 75 years, we have, in my mind, overpowered the Supreme Court. They just have way more authority and power than they ought to have. And
who should the power rest with? The House?
Well, when it comes to legislation, it should rest with the Congress. It shouldn't be up to the Supreme Court to day in and day out make legislative decisions, but that is in fact largely what they do now. And
everybody on both sides are standing around with pitchforks just waiting to see how
and you have no alternative to that. I mean, the Supreme Court says yay or nay, suck it. That's what's going to happen. I think legislature can pick up the ball and rewrite the laws, but at this point they're at loggerheads so often they very rarely get things done up there. So I will say the Supreme Court does make decisions, but I don't know. In my mind, they're just a little bit too overpowered. And then you get someone like, Sotomayor, who, intellectually couldn't run a light bulb. And I mean, if you ever read some of her decisions, they just make you kind of scratch your head and wonder if you're taking crazy pills. And now she's part of the Supreme Court. So I'm just,
thank God, diversity, right?
We don't need the best. We just need to make sure that our Supreme Court photo looks like United Colors of Benetton ad.
Hashtag United Airlines.
Honest to God, I don't care what color you are. I just want the best person in the position.
Yeah.
If everybody there is purple or green or polka dot, I just don't care. But making a decision based on something as ridiculous as race is just silly in my mind.
It is silly.
Sexual orientation.
Yeah. Let's see here. Troy has just joined us. Good morning, sir. He is coin number 848 out of Indiana. Mark over there in Australia says verbalization is not a lawful form of prosecution. Will Parker says the entire federal government has taken more power and control than the Constitution affords. Sounds like a Jeffersonian anti-federalist. Couldn't agree with you more, sir. Sean says any SCOTUS decision will have to be unanimous or will do tremendous damage to the court. Chief Justice Roberts will water down any decision until he gets all 9 votes. Interesting. Johnny King says DEI needs to die. Diversity, equity, inclusion, of course, is what he's talking about. So let's get back to this. So we understand SCOTUS is going to be looking at this. Unfortunately, we won't know this coming Thursday what's happening behind those hallowed halls. However, we're going to be watching to see what they say. Now, I would just throw this map up here once again to show how divisive this is right now. Let's talk about issue number 2, Dr. Fuller. My goodness, what the hell is going on at the border, sir?
God knows. I mean, at first I was of the opinion that calling it an invasion was a bit hyperbolic, but now it's hard to argue against. I mean, the numbers I'm seeing, 7.5 million is kind of in the middle of the pack for the numbers I've seen. I've seen as low as 2 million, as high as 22 million. But, it kind of depends on whose numbers you believe, and that boils down to what your political affiliation is. Regardless, it's catastrophic. And I have to laugh in some cases. I know I shouldn't, but you've gotten, admittedly, millions of people coming across the border. I was in Denver last week. They took in 42,000 and they're screaming.
Yeah.
And it's shutting down. It shut down a wing of a hospital while I was there because they couldn't continue to provide services at the level they were being required. So
free services, by the way, Dr. Fuller.
Of course, they're not free to you and I.
No.
But they're free to these 42,000 people. They have no place to house them. They have no place to feed them. They're just, and I'll tell you, the streets are covered. Driving around Denver while I was out there was unbelievable. I was talking to our friend Andrew Bronca. He's considering his options when it comes to places to live because he lives right outside of Denver, and he's raising 2 small kids, and he's thinking, I don't have to put up with this. I have the flexibility to leave if I want to, and that's what he's considering doing. And I don't blame him. He told me he doesn't go downtown to Denver without weapons because it's just too dangerous.
Yeah.
And I saw it. And that's just one town. New York City, 110,000 people they've absorbed on bus rides. And they're saying that the city's about to collapse under the pressure of all these, unhoused, homeless, illegal dreamers.
Yeah.
But he's also, I guess, New York has taken to fining the bus companies that are bringing them up from Texas and Florida and whatnot. Said, "Oh, your bus company brought these people up. We're going to fine you." So now the bus companies, I'm sure, are going to court over that, which is going to cost them more money. They're screaming. And I'm like, well, you expect Texas, Arizona, Florida, California, all these southern states to absorb these bodies in the millions, but you cry uncle when you get them in the thousands.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't get it. And I certainly don't understand what the logic is at the national level. I mean, are we really that cynical and we want to get reelected that badly that we're willing to absorb millions of people in the hopes that they will vote for our party? Is that what's going on here? Because that's ludicrous.
Yeah. No, sadly, I agree with you. Will Parker says, I have some Border Patrol agents as customers. A couple of months ago, I said, I believe there were 100 million illegal aliens in the U.S. And without missing a beat, he said, at least. Oof. Tony says the Congress has purposely failed to legislate decisively in favor of plausible deniability. They have to use the APA to create an administration oligarchy. Alan says the taxpayers are handled the burden that the border cluster has caused. This takes away services for taxpayers. Yeah, it sure as hell does. And again, this is another thing we often overlook. Okay, a lot of infrastructure gets destroyed and blah, 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 but 312 folks on the terror watch list got caught. But don't worry, Kamala Harris is still the borders. So I know everybody feels safer about that. How much time has she spent on our southern border doing her job? She's visited one time. Let me say that again. One time. Unprecedented numbers. And I've got some charts to show you guys coming up here. The Economist had an excellent article on this. They said the border crisis, and of course, nobody would accuse the Economist of being a right-wing rag. But this is some interesting stuff here, Dr. Fuller. And let's look at each slide and then we'll kind of discuss it. Okay.
Please.
This first one here, monthly encounters at the southwestern land border. And these are in the hundreds of thousands. And you can see Bush, Obama, Trump, and then Biden. That first chart is a hockey stick, if you will, sir. Demography, monthly encounters at the southwest border by nationality. And you can see the others just going through the roof. And that's what's scary. You know, the Northern Triangle, Venezuela, Colombia, and all those are falling, but the other category, meaning Chinese nationals, is increasing in that second chart. And our third chart here shows the backlog of cases more than doubled during Mr. Trump's presidency and doubled again under Mr. Biden. The backlog now stands at more than 3 million. And this is the interesting one here. If America's 659 immigration judges ruled on 4 cases every business day, it would still take them more than 4 years to clear the docket. And that's without adding any additional cases. The Congressional Research Service, a government body, reckons that even doubling the number of judges would not clear the backlog until 2032. Wow.
Yeah, I have no intelligent response to that.
I don't either.
And it blows me away that you go back and you watch President Clinton's State of the Union speeches, and he's calling for immigration reform. I mean, every president that I can remember in my lifetime has had that as an issue. Let's have immigration reform. Let's have immigration reform. And in my lifetime, I've seen both houses of Congress in the, owned by one party as well as the presidency. So you got everybody in the same party in charge, and they don't address immigration. And then the other party gets in charge, and they don't address immigration. Address immigration. It's harder to say than you might think. But they keep it alive as an issue. And so why? Why would they do that? Well, because it's a hot button issue. You can energize your base and get them to contribute money to your campaigns. If you say the other guy is screwing this up, reelect me or elect me and I'll fix it. We'll fix it. My party will fix it. But they don't. They don't fix it. And this is what we get.
Yeah, I mean, think about that, guys. 8 years from now, if we doubled the number of judges right now, we could push a button, Dr. Fuller, and say, now we got 1,300 immigration judges. Bang. Wow, look at that. It still would take them 8 years to clear the backlog. Yeah. And they're pouring in by the tens, if not hundreds of thousands every single month. So we're not going to fix it anytime soon. Let's look at the second slide. Issue number 2, border crisis. Say it again, Dr. Fuller.
You know what would fix it? If we actually let Customs and Border Patrol do their job and start deporting people in the numbers in which they're showing up.
Landmines are cheaper than razor wire, just saying.
Just saying. Or do what President Trump said, apply from your own country.
Yeah.
And I have to scratch my head at why Mexico is not helping us stop this. Millions of people don't pour across the border from Mexico without some level of cooperation from Mexico. Yeah. Anyhow, I didn't mean to interrupt. Please continue.
No. Will Parker says, you're right, TC. They don't fix it because they do not want to. Treason. Makes you think. Tina says the Uniparty, liberals and rhinos have destroyed this country. And according to these graphs, I think Tina is onto something here. It's pretty, and this is bad news for the 46th president's campaign. Of course, Joseph Robinette Biden, because a poll in December 2017 found that only 12% of Democrats favored building a wall at the southern border, which is one of obviously the 45th president's main campaign promises in 2016. However, a poll in December 2023 of Democrats found that number has risen to 32%. So it's almost doubled because even the Democrats are seeing the same numbers we're seeing. Look at this. Unaccompanied children encounters at the border, Dr. Fuller. Look at that chart number 5. That's insane.
Yeah. And then they become anchors, right? Well, where's your mom? Well, my mom happens to be sitting in Tijuana waiting for a call.
Yeah.
And
here's the phone number.
The kid back to mom, they bring mom up to the kid.
Yeah. And then a few years, they're going to call that child a dreamer. And now she has protections because of Biden's executive order in the first day in office. Migrants arrested monthly by the government. These are in the thousands. So you can see under Trump, looked like we had a handle on it. And then under Biden, the spike went up again. Deportations finally is the number 8 chart here. Deportations, look at that. Fallen.
Deportations.
I mean,
And
none of
anecdotally,
these charts by The Economist look good. And again, Rich didn't put these together. I didn't go to imright.com. This is The Economist. And like John Hearn said the other day, he goes, economists are about the only people I believe these days.
he made a good point. He made a very good argument during that show.
Yeah.
And I think what we're seeing is 32% want that wall built. 32% of Democrats want the wall built because they're starting to see the crimes in their backyards. They're starting to see the negative effects of uncontrolled immigration are starting to impact them. And, it's just human nature, right? It's not a problem if it's your problem. It's a problem when it's my problem.
Yeah.
And, New York City just had those 2 police officers attacked. And you saw that video, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
And then they let these guys go. And what thinking person says, oh, yeah, that's fair. That's a good idea.
And what did they do as they walked past the cameras, Dr. Fuller?
Yeah, flip them off. Yeah. But, as soon as one of those police officers, and I understand why they didn't shoot him. I mean, in my mind, they were clearly across the line, legally 100%. Speaking, for the use of deadly defensive force. Mm-hmm. Although I would certainly bow to Andrew Branca's superior knowledge on the topic. But I'm sure they didn't shoot him because they knew that the criminals would then go from being violent criminal actors to, playful rogues out on, the town because they were, shot by racist anti-immigration police officers. So instead, the cops took a beating, a near life-threatening beating. Makes me very glad to be retired.
I know, right? My brother Jeff says during the Vice interview, Biden said he would have any ICE agent fired if they arrested a DUI illegal immigrant. I did not see that, hear that. Of course, that comports beautifully to my own confirmation bias. I'll have to definitely check that one out. Alan Kelly says Mexico does not want to deal with him. Gal says, I'm glad I visited the U.S. legally. Will says, folks who say they want illegal immigration, knock on the door and deliver 10 of them to be taken care of. Well said.
Have you seen the video of the guy that was walking around a British pro-immigration rally? And he had a clipboard and he said, hey, I see you've got a sign here that says you're pro-immigration and you want to let these people in. He let the person talk a little bit. Yeah, they should come in. This, that. He go, great. I've got a list here. How many can you house? Can you take 4? We need you. We really got to put these 4 people in. Mm-hmm. And every single person. Oh, my house? No. I'm renting. I don't have space. House being fumigated. Can't take anybody right now. And he says, well, where should we put them then? Well, somewhere else. But yeah. Come on.
It's the same thing with do you think college should be free? Oh yeah. Okay. No problem. Sign this and just tell me what percentage of your salary that you want to have put toward it.
5.
No.
I don't want to pay him.
Yeah. Okay. So yesterday, as most of us probably know, because this is a very discerning group of folks we have watching the show this morning, Dr. Fuller, 14 governors were there at Eagle Pass with Governor Greg Abbott of Texas. And I just want to kind of show you guys the January fact sheet that Texas has put out. I know we discussed this last Monday, but I want to go over these numbers again because they're absolutely unbelievable. Since the launch of Operation Lone Star, December 2021 until now, the multi-agency effort has arrested they've had over, let's just say it, almost 500,000 migrant apprehensions and 35,100 felony charges. In the fight against fentanyl, Texas law enforcement has seized 454 million lethal doses of fentanyl. And I'm not a demographer, but I think that's probably enough to kill every man, woman, and child in North America and probably Mexico as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And
check my math on that, but I think I'm right.
Carry the 3. Yeah, I think you're right. But, that's the important thing in that set of stats to me is apprehended. That's the ones we caught.
Yeah.
Those are just the ones we caught in one state. Right. Arizona's got a border with Mexico. California does. These are just the ones we're getting caught. And as well as I do that the cartels factor in to their shipment numbers losses. Mm-hmm. They say, look, we're willing to accept a certain percentage of loss going across the border. So if that's a percentage lost, how much is coming through?
Yeah.
Because this didn't bankrupt them. Losing 455 million doses didn't put these cartels into Chapter 11, right?
Yeah.
They're still making them. They're still shipping them. They're still making money.
Yeah. So, and I love these numbers, Dr. Fuller. Whoever come up with this idea and Abbott's cabinet is a damn genius to start shipping these migrants up there. Let those communities have a taste of just a small taste of what they're having down there at the southern border. I think it's genius.
Well, and look at the numbers too that have been transported. We're looking at 50, 80, close to 100,000, just back of the envelope map. Where'd the other 400,000 go? Because the federal government has exclusive rights to extradite, right? Texas can't put these people back over the border themselves. So where'd they go? Texas absorbed them? You know,
I don't know how.
And back to what I was saying earlier, New York City gets 110,000. They start screaming. Texas takes in 400,000 without batting an eye. They're sending 20% of the people they catch to other states. 20%. What happens if they start sending 40%? 50%? Half. Just half. Yeah. And where are they putting them all? I mean, I haven't heard anything about tent cities being erected out in western Texas. And certainly there's the space, but the logistic requirements would be prohibitive, I imagine.
Yeah, there's when you talk about how they got here, it's interesting. Some of the myths are getting dispelled when you really drill down into this. A lot of them are flying into Ecuador. These are the Uzbekistanis, the Chinese, all those that are not from the Western Hemisphere. They're flying into Ecuador because there's no visa. And then some of them will then fly from Ecuador and straight to Tijuana, where they paid, let's say, $900 to a smuggler to take them to this one spot, and they can walk in. There's a spot on a 60 Minutes interview that I sent to Dr. Fuller. I'll post it later today. There's a spot about 30 miles east of San Diego where everybody knows the hole is there. And every 30 minutes, another van drops another group of Chinese nationals off to walk across the hole. And you'll see them coming through and just dropping their passports into a pile right there as they're coming up. Don't need that anymore. I'm in. And it's just unbelievable.
And the coyotes, well, that's what they called them when I was growing up in California. The smugglers are advertising online now. You can get a package vacation deal to the U.S. And we don't do anything about it. We're just like, okay, let them come. Because they'll probably vote for one specific political party. So that'll be great.
Yeah. So this is where it stands as the end of January. And you can see the red states, not political affiliation red, whoever put this chart together. I think it's Appalachian something on Instagram, but he's been pretty good about this. New or ongoing deployments for those states' National Guard to Texas. So you can see Idaho, North Dakota, South Dakota, Tennessee, Ohio, Virginia, South Carolina, Florida, etc. have new or ongoing deployments. Sorry.
English is hard.
It's early.
I'm with you.
It's early, man. Deployments to Texas. And then you have the candy striped. The governors have pledged support for Texas. However, no personnel deployed currently. So they're pledging support, haven't sent anybody. The green states, the Guard is deployed to their own border. So Arizona and California have deployed the Guard to their own border. And then, of course, you have the pink state Guard deployed to the Arizona border. That's New York. So it's just, it's interesting, man. What do you make of this chart?
Well, of course, the first thing you think of is, well, I guess we've got the idea of how this is going to look if a civil war breaks out. And it's interesting to me that New York is more than happy to support a Democratic senator in Arizona, but they're not going to help that knucklehead in Texas, by God.
Yeah.
Who's the one that's sending him all the people.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. How about you just say, hey, Texas, stop sending him here and we'll send our guardsmen down there to help you. Seems like might be a wise idea.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the states that are not sending people, I'm sure, haven't gotten much. And well, yes, Illinois has gotten some people shipped up to them.
Yeah.
But, I think it does a good job of demonstrating which states either have a problem or are concerned about the problem.
Yeah. And Johnny King brings up a point. He says, I'm ashamed that Kentucky has a weasel in the Capitol and will likely not support Abbott. And the reason that they've got it half and half is that the governor and the legislature are split on what they're going to do. So these other states are pretty much standing in lockstep. And you'll notice New Hampshire up there is brown. And that is the only GOP Republican governor who has refused to support Texas thus far in their Operation Lone Star.
Well, he's got to get reelected. And the bottom third of New Hampshire is at least in my experience, is largely occupied by folks commuting into Boston.
Yeah.
So I think he's got a very significant political tightrope to walk up there if he wants to keep his job, which of course to you and I, that's not the priority, pal. Keeping your job is not the reason we sent you that place to do that job.
Doing right isn't always popular, and that's why it's called leadership, not likership. If it was likership, you'd just be a popularity contest, and whoever's the most, hey, But that's not what it's about, man.
It's junior high class president competition, but
right. So on to issue number 3, Dr. Fuller, unless you had anything else on the border.
No, that's quite depressing enough. Let's move on to something less exciting.
To me, I've always looked at it as the first Civil War was the Revolutionary War, whether we call it that or not, because most of the colonists at the time were supportive of remaining with Great Britain. And if you look at a lot of the battles, it might have been led by a British officer, but it was an army of loyalists, colonists against colonists. So, but we don't often think about the American Revolution in terms of a civil war. We think of it, we're throwing off the shackles of King George and going to chart our own course as free men. Okay, well, yeah, there was that too. But it was also a war amongst colonists. Have you ever thought about it like that?
No, I haven't. I mean, but I think you have a very good point. Certainly room for discussion and debate in there. I've always thought that Mel Gibson's character in The Patriot was had the pulse of things. That look, we do not want to fight these guys.
Right.
This is a bad idea. Well, we've talked to them until we can't talk to them. Then keep talking to them, because this is just not going to go well. It's not going to be fought on distant battlefields. It's going to be fought in our front yards. And he's right. That's exactly what ended up happening.
So today I'm going to talk about the Revolutionary War. This is according to the History Channel. The History Channel says there was 7 things that led to the American Revolution. I'm going to propose that there's actually an 8th thing, and we'll talk about that. And I just want to kind of give the background and see if we see some historic parallels here. It started with the stamp. And now the other thing I want to do is I put dates on here so you could see that this is a slow burn, right? It didn't happen overnight. This is gradual over the course of 10 plus years before we finally got to the point. So when everybody thinks the Civil War going to happen tomorrow, we could be in the beginning stages of it and have no idea. What do you think about that?
I think you're right. I think the only real difference between then and now is just going to be the speed of communication.
Yes.
Right. I mean, it just took months to get a message back from the king saying implement a Stamp Act or whatnot. Communication now is a lot faster. It's easier to whip up a crowd or a riot now than it was back then. So speed, I think, is a difference. But yeah, it could be a very slow one, because at the end of the day, as we've talked about on this show multiple times, there are an awful lot of people out there that don't want anything to do with this. They just want things to chill out. And if they have to put down their beer and get up off their couch, it's going to be bad. And none of us want that. And so I think you've got a lot of people like the Mel Gibson character saying, look, we don't want this. We don't want it to go this way. This boogaloo thing is just, it sounds good on the range, but it's a dumbass idea. We need to stay the hell away from it.
Yeah. So, I read David McCulloch's amazing book, John Adams, and I read His Excellency about George Washington. So these are just some books I've read recently about it. And then, of course, in 2008, the HBO miniseries, John Adams, which is outstanding, by the way. If you haven't watched that 8-part series.
Read his book on Ben Franklin, too. It's a nice.
I did. I did. And I read Walter Isaacson's book on Ben Franklin. And, of course, I read his own autobiography. But, yeah, I think our founding fathers, or whatever you want to call them, are important to understand, because they were men like us making a really terrible decisions. And so let's talk about the Stamp Act, because that's what got everybody pissed off. And what Britain was trying to do is recoup some of the money that they spent protecting the colonists from the Indians during the French and Indian War. But the colonists were pissed off. They resented having to buy British goods and pay a tax on them. And what's interesting about this, the Stamp Act was the tax was never collected.
I didn't know that. I read the slide earlier. I thought, sure, they collected.
No, but actually, who got us out of it? Ben Franklin went before Parliament. It's like, hey, man, they're pissed off. They're ready to burn this damn thing to the ground. You might want to repeal this thing. So they actually never even collected on it. But it just pissed the colonists off so bad. Like, what do you mean we have to pay for our own security? So then you had the Townsend Act a couple years later, established a board of customs commissioners to stop smuggling and corruption among local officials in the colonies. So you had the colonial officials were guilty of smuggling. Hell, that's how John Hancock got rich. He was a smuggler, and several others in that time.
Kennedy.
They were in on it. Yeah.
American tradition.
Say that again.
It's an American tradition.
Exactly. Americans organized a boycott of the British goods that were subject to the taxation and began harassing British customs commissioners. And that means tar and feathering and all kinds of things. Terrible stuff. And they show an instance of that, which is really hard to watch in the John Adams miniseries.
Yeah, tarring and feathering. We heard about it a lot as kids, but man, that's no joke. That's just,
it's awful.
Yeah.
I don't know how you get cleaned up from that, but Johnny King says even God gave Noah time to prepare. It didn't happen overnight. No, it did not. So Townsend Act goes down. There are lots of back and forth at the harbors around New England over this deal. Then you have the Boston Massacre in 1770. 5 colonialists dead. Cyprus Atticus, I may be mispronouncing, was one of the dead. He was a free African American who was a sailor. He was shot along with 5 other colonists. And of course, it became a useful tool. But of course, the colonists were throwing rocks and oyster shells and, not just snowballs when the soldiers opened fire. And they really had no other way to do it. I mean, you're surrounded by hundreds of angry mob. And I think there was like 7 British soldiers getting attacked.
Yeah. And you don't have the benefits of tasers and sting ball grenades and pepper spray and dogs and water cannons or any of that.
And when they saw them, put on the bayonets, they didn't back up and had to do what they had to do.
You would think a 2-foot long hunk of steel on the end of a rifle would be an attention getter, but not Americans when they've been in their cups and they're pissed off.
Yeah. And I'm sure many of them had just left the pub and pretty south. The Tea Party, 3 years later. And what's another interesting thing, a lot of people may or may not know this, John Adams, as an attorney there in Boston, was the one that defended Captain Preston, who was the commander of the British who fired on the crowd, and got them acquitted, by the way. All but 2 people. They got acquitted of murder, but they were found of a lesser charge and branded. Of course, the miniseries does not show that, but I digress. The Tea Party in 1773. So after the repeal of the very disliked Townsend Act, they Parliament said, okay, screw it, but we're going to keep the Tea Act in there. We'll repeal the Townsend Act. We understand the colonists don't like it. You're harassing our customs officials. To hell with it. We'll get rid of it. However, we're going to leave the Tea Act. And the reason they did that was they had to prop up the struggling British East India Company. So, and that's what history books tell you. But the reality was that most of Parliament in England owned stocks in, guess what? The British East India Company. So they were looking.
The history of that organization is really, really fascinating, and how it existed kind of as a quasi government arm. And it was a big, like you said, it was a big moneymaker for members of Parliament. But I mean, who would believe that people would get into Parliament or Congress in order to enrich themselves? I mean, that's just pure fantasy.
Hashtag Nancy Pelosi. What it did, it gave a monopoly on tea to the colonists, and it pissed the colonists off because they had been buying their tea cheaper from Dutch traders, and now they have to buy this substandard tea from the British East India Company. And again, like we said, spoiler alert, all the Parliament had their fat little hands in making money through the British India Company. So then of course, what happened is a bunch of Sons of Liberty clambered aboard and dumped like 93,000 pounds of tea into the harbor.
Jesus.
And what's interesting about it is they made sure they did not harm any sailors on those ships. And the one lock that they broke, they replaced it the next day. But they just wanted to prove a point.
Point proven. Here we are 250 years later, still talking about it.
Exactly. So the coercive acts follow on the heels of this because now Parliament's pissed off. So they closed Boston Harbor until restitution can be paid for all the tea that was destroyed, and replace the colonial elected council with one appointed by the crown, gave sweeping powers to the British military, and forbid town meetings without prior approval. So now we're getting pissed off. One of the other things that these sweeping powers was the Quartering Act. And what's interesting about that is that led to the Third Amendment. Everybody knows the First Amendment, Dr. Fuller. Everybody knows the Second Amendment, but the third
is the forgotten amendment.
It is, and it's an interesting one. Would you say that?
I would, and honestly, it makes perfect sense for anyone who's ever had to sleep in a barracks or been around drunk Marines when they've into the night and they're going to sleep. It makes absolute sense. You don't want them in your living room. You don't want them down the hall from your daughter's room. I get it.
Yeah. What's interesting about the Quartering Act, having some research on it last night preparing for this, is it was actually, the way it was written was, if there's an empty house, get to take it. Okay. And so it wasn't like what I had thought is they come in and kick a family out, or they say, you're going to take the first fire team of 3rd Squad. Good luck handling these animals. But they did say, you do have to feed them. So it wasn't, I think in my mind as a, descendant of colonists myself, that they were just going and kicking mom and dad out. But that really wasn't the way the law was written, the Quartering Act. But it pissed us off to the point where it was forefront on our mind when we were writing the amendments to the Constitution.
It's an uncredited tax, right? I mean, yes. Having to feed 3 or 4 or 5 adult males, military age males, is not inexpensive. I mean, you have 2 sons, you know what it's like to feed, a couple of teenage boys. Now make them 20 and make them doing work all day, hard work. So now you've got to pay out of pocket to feed these guys that you didn't invite in, that you didn't have any say in whether or not they're here. Not cheap. And by the way, it's not reducing your tax burden.
No. And the, just so everybody knows, prior to this, it wasn't like the British weren't there. They were there, but they would bill it out in the country, right outside the city. They would put up tents and stay there. But because there was so much turmoil in the city, they're like, hey man, we got to move them in. We got to have a quicker response time. Let's bring those soldiers into the actual city. Thus the Quartering Act, which led to Lexington and Concord, where 77 colonists attacked British soldiers attempting to arrest Samuel Adams, not Jan Adams, but his cousin Samuel Adams, the leader of the Sons of Liberty, and Mr. John Hancock, as well as seize control of colonial gunpowder. And the British lost 73 dead, 174 wounded, and 26 missing in action. The colonists lost 7. That's an ass kicking, Dr. Fuller.
There's by any rubric you want to come up with, that's an ass kicking.
Yeah, that's an ass kicking.
But, think about what it sparked off, or, provided the casus belli for a war that cost thousands of people their lives and livelihoods. But yeah, and if you're the British, I mean, what an assault on your national prestige. You can't put up with this.
No,
you just can't have it. These uppity colonists have been acting out for a while, and now they've killed British soldiers.
Yep.
And look at how we respond, right? We're all more than happy to let you shoot down our drones and take pot shots at our boats in the Middle East. You kill 3 American soldiers and we start flattening your buildings and killing your people like it's our job.
Yeah.
Americans have always taken it very, very personally when our people get killed.
Yeah. And the reason why the losses were so high was once they saw that the colonists were there and started firing on them, General Gage did not want any further loss of life. So he starts, retreat, let's get back to Boston. And the colonists just harassed them all the way back. And just firing on them as they retreated. I'm not saying they shouldn't have. I'm just saying that's what happened. That's why the losses were so lopsided. And finally, the British reprisal, Dr. Fuller, was, as you might imagine, swift and brutal, just like ours would be, as you alluded to before. And any coastal town that they could shell and set alight, they did.
Yeah, and they didn't have to worry about a CNN or a 24-hour news cycle to influence their public opinions that they had to worry about. They simply said, go punish them. You could literally say, I want a punitive raid all up and down the East Coast. And the local commander was, Roger that. And that's exactly what he did. And even British Marines are just like American Marines. They like to kill people and break their toys.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. They do indeed, sir.
That's what they bring to the table.
Gal says, you guys think civil war can happen in the U.S. again? Yes, I think it can. And we may already be in the early stages of it. More on that later. Alan Kelly says civil wars end up pitting fathers against sons, brothers against brother, etc. Nothing about a civil war is good. A tremendous loss of life. To what end? And to that point, Benjamin Franklin's son, did not side with his father. I think he was a British officer during the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, and to Alan's point, none of us, a thinking man, does not want that to happen. None of us want a civil war. We'll put up with all kinds of crap to avoid a shooting war inside the United States. Now, if you're China or Russia, would that be a good thing for you? Yeah, probably. So what would you do to encourage that sort of behavior? I don't know, but I imagine you would do something.
Oh, he'll do something.
I imagine, because, the U.S., this is going to sound, egocentric, but the U.S. isn't going to lose a conventional war to any country or any two countries on this planet.
No.
Pick an alliance on this planet. We're not going to lose militarily. But how have we lost wars in the 20th century? Public opinion, right? How did Vietnam beat the United States? Well, they didn't beat us on the battlefield.
How did 50,000 Taliban beat us? We went in and we went in and deposed the Taliban only to replace them with the Taliban.
So they didn't beat us militarily.
No,
that just didn't happen. But you can beat the United States morally. You can break our will to fight as a nation fairly easily, I would suggest. And you'd have to be a foolish nation state not to understand that, not to recognize that is our weak point. That's our Achilles heel. So why would you not exploit it? If you're the Chinese and you want this to be the Chinese century, you've got to take us off the table. Mm-hmm. How do you do that?
You sow dissent internally, sure. And they're doing a fantastic job of that.
And what's that cost?
We're doing a fantastic job of it to ourselves, let alone other nation state actors that may be playing upon us, because we all have this. This is the gateway drug to what's going on inside my skull, your skull, our skull, and it can sow dissent.
And anybody can get on and create a following of people all over the country, right? It used to be if you were of one particular political stripe or one type of insanity, your reach was fairly limited, right? Maybe you could get a newsletter going, or maybe you could, get a phone tree going, but that was about it.
Yeah.
Now, a guy in Tennessee can have a podcast talking to a guy in South Carolina and reach a guy in the Philippines or England, right? Mm-hmm. Australia.
Yeah.
So, now take that same platform and go from, hey, get ready, be aware of what's going on in the world, have some sort of situational awareness, and you turn that platform into burn it all, vote for my guy. Well, we can
Tom, again, going back to the revolution, Thomas Paine put together, was it Common Sense was his pamphlet. It really stirred up a lot of people. And of course, as I mentioned before, there were several counter pamphlets that just broke apart Thomas Paine's, and it was loyalists doing it. Now, were they propagandists for the crown? Perhaps, who knows? But I mean, this has a long history. But what is interesting now is the speed, as you mentioned earlier, Dr. Fuller. It doesn't take months for somebody at Parliament to read Thomas Paine's pamphlet and go, "Oh shit." Tell them over there to do something, and then it's going to take months to get there. It can happen in a nanosecond.
It's sad but true. And it's funny. I think, guys, our generation in the United States, we kind of got spoiled with our news broadcasts, because all of our lives up until the last, say, decade, newsmen, if you will, tried very hard to be objective. They tried to give you
Ron Burgundy, right?
Right, sir?
Like Ron Burgundy.
Yeah, like Ron Burgundy, exactly. The exemplar for all of us to follow. But, Walter Cronkite, he had his political beliefs, and we've talked about this before, but in that 30 minutes when he was talking, he was just conveying the facts. And you had an educated populace digesting those facts, capable of making their own decisions. And so we kind of got used to our media personalities are objective. But that's not the history. I mean, Ben Franklin owned how many papers back in the day? And he did not think twice about using them for political ends. Hearst, right? Hearst and his yellow journalism arguably got us involved in the Spanish-American War. And now we see the media as political operatives. Let's face it, most people choose their news outlets based on their political affiliations, right? But it's jarring, I think, for people of a certain age, because we're not used to it, because that wasn't our reality. But the truth is, historically speaking, journalism has a horrible track record of honesty and objectivity. Although they'll die on that hill to say we're objective and free press is critical to the establishment and the survival of a democracy. Okay, well, then be that. Don't be a partisan press.
Yeah.
Find me a partisan press in the United States today that's doing well.
Yeah.
I'll wait. I'll wait here.
You'll be around all day. So again, this is where we could be heading is, as I said earlier, Civil War 3.0.
Talk about that number 8 there, unanswered petitions to the crown.
Man, this is the problem, Dr. Fuller. So this one right here, man, it ain't like the first and second Congress weren't trying to communicate to the crown and like, hey, man, we got some serious problems. And if you read these petitions, they were incredibly heartfelt. And they talk a lot about, the sovereignty of the crown and how they want to be loyal subjects. And they just have a few grievances. If you just hear me out, I'm telling you, read them there. And you probably have, but they're incredible. And then finally, the olive branch petition goes over, and it's just really bowing down on your hands and knees as colonists, like, please, and again, if you look at the first and second congressional minutes, it's like, we want to resolve to create a petition, and here's what our aims and goals are with this petition. And really, it's restore a peaceful union with the crown and continue to be loyal subjects. That's where the whole taxation without representation comes in. And both of the petitions were never answered by Parliament or the crown. So I would again say that when you have all these things going on and then you're begging for, hey, man, just hear me out on this one. And as Benjamin Franklin, who was sitting there in Parliament, wanting to see how the petition would be received, he wrote back like, look, it was thrown onto the table with a bunch of other correspondence and miscellaneous intelligence coming from the colonies. Nobody read it. Nobody said a word about it. And that was the end of it. So,
and adults, I will say this from the educational perspective, adults just want to be heard.
Correct.
You really do. I mean, you spent a lifetime in the traces with the government bureaucracy. I did as well. You understand that, look, things are not always going to go your way. The decisions aren't always going to be in your favor. In fact, they probably mostly won't be in your favor. Everybody gets that. And nobody really gets pissed off about it until they're just not being listened to.
Right.
You take a senior NCO, take a gunnery sergeant who tells some second lieutenant or captain, hey, sir, this is what we ought to do, 1, 2, 3. And that guy listens to him and says, okay, I hear what you're saying, Sergeant, but you know what? I got other priorities that are going to have to trump this, or we're going to have to go this other way. Gunny's going to say, Roger out, sir, move up. But if he says those things and that same officer looks at him and goes, and pays no attention to him, just goes off and does his own thing, what happens?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, that's exactly what happened with the colonies, right? Look, and I would argue a lot of it's being played out again right now.
That's why I'm talking about it, right?
Who
this is exactly
feels disenfranchised in this country? Who feels like, why would I vote? I mean, and we're 60% of our voting age population, 50% of our voting age population is just like, why bother?
Right.
I'm not being listened to. My voice is inconsequential. So I'm just going to, save my Tuesday afternoon for something else.
And that's exactly why we're talking about this, because I think that history repeats and we're seeing some of the same things play out again. We're being taxed to death, right? There's some government coercion that certain parts of the country feel like, I don't like what's being done to me. I don't like what's being done with my tax dollars. I feel like I don't have a say, and it's creating this dissent. So if it happened then, it can happen now. And that's why I say, the petitions are incredibly important. They're beautiful documents to read and understand where their head was at the time and how they did not want this war. They knew that and these were rich men. And I think that often gets overlooked. General Washington alone in today's dollars would be worth almost $1 billion. These people were insanely wealthy, every single one of them. So they had a lot of money to lose, and their money was not in colonial currency. Their money was in British pounds or Dutch kroner or whatever the hell they have over there. But my point of saying that is a lot to lose. General Washington, he told, I think it was the First Continental Congress, I will raise, pay, and feed 1,000 men at my own expense. You can't do that on a Rich Brown and T.C. Fuller salary.
It's hard enough to raise and pay for 2 kids in my house, let alone 1,000 men. So yeah, and again, I mentioned it earlier. England was the badass at the time. They were the superpower.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not taking anything away from England now. I love those guys, and it was also always great to see them show up when I was in Afghanistan, because I was like, all right, I feel a lot better now the Brits are here. But back then, they were not to be trifled with. The sun never sets on the British Empire, right? These guys were everywhere, and you can't take a war with that kind of juice casually, and they didn't.
No.
Just like people nowadays, you can't take the idea of a shooting war with the United States military casually, even if it divides and you end up with forces on both sides. That's a lot of firepower directed internally. Nobody wants that, least of all those of us who've seen what it can do.
And I mean, you think about they're trying to fight a war against colonists, 7,000 miles away, and hell, they're almost bankrupt. And that's the other thing, the British, when they were at war with France during the French and Indian Wars, or what maybe in Europe they call the 7 Years' War, they were teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, which is why they put those acts on the colonists to begin with, trying to recoup some money. They made their navy smaller, et cetera, so that when we finally went to war with them, they were a fraction of what they had been before.
And yet still a dominating force.
Hell yeah. But they were still the superpower, like you said. And they did downsize their military just like we do after you win a war. Because we just won,
Everyone's going home for Christmas.
Right. What do you think about what my brother Jeff says here, Dr. Fuller? He says, is the amount of diversity in the U.S. has it created a fertile soil for civil war, as in less assimilation? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're not a melting pot, right? We're a salad bar, right?
Yep.
We've got a cup of broccoli and a cup of tomatoes and a cup of lettuce, and people aren't blending in anymore. So I think that makes it difficult. I think the concentration on diversity is really taking our eye off the ball. I mean, I don't see the Russian military worrying about, do we have significant trans representation in our officer corps? I don't see the Chinese saying, look, we don't have near enough Caucasians in the People's Liberation Army. We need to up those numbers. These are rookie numbers. I just don't think those are on their radar at all. And yet we're concentrating on that. We're providing transgender surgeries for our soldiers because we want them to be comfortable. I don't see the Indian military worrying about the comfort of their troops, right? That's just not the priority. And yet that seems to be our priority. So to Jeff's point, it's taking our eye off the ball. We're not concentrating on the right things. And by not assimilating people, I mean, how many people that served in the military heard, look, some sort of paraphrase of Gunnery Sergeant Hartman's, you're all equally worthless to me, right?
Oh, yeah.
That whole speech. I don't care what color you are. And you don't. Everybody's green, right? Well, now you're green, but you're also polka dot and you're purple. And we don't do enough to break down those allegiances in order to replace them with the militarily appropriate allegiances. And I think that's throughout our country. We're not concentrating on being Americans so much as we're concentrating on being Somalis in America, or Ethiopians in America, or Russians in America, Uzbeks in America. And I don't think a nation populated by that kind of cliqueism, Balkanization, however you want to put it, is long for this world.
I mean, Teddy Roosevelt warned against hyphenated Americans.
He did
120 years ago.
And Putin talked about it in Russia 5 years ago.
Yeah.
In essence, he said, if you want to come here and be Russian, come here and be Russian. But if you want to come here and be some other country, don't come here. We don't want you.
Yeah. This idea that diversity is our strength is it absolutely has no statistical bearing. It has no historical backing as well. Homogenous groups are the ones that get shit done. I hate to tell you that, but it's a fact. Will Parker says the U.S. is bankrupt and the government is putting it on the backs of Americans and piling on debt faster than the economy the entire world could pay. And of course, Will Wood and I talked about that last week. Tony says, after the last election, does my vote even count? Well, and of course, Will Parker says, doesn't it make you feel good that the government listening to the people hasn't changed? Yeah. So anyway, this next Monday, I'm going to talk about the Civil War 2.0 in the 1860 to 1865, and you'll see some of the same themes kind of play out again as to what we're seeing today. So Let's talk about issue number 4, Dr. Fuller. And I want to, these are in no particular order. They're just some thoughts that I had coming as far as, are we in it? Are we not in it? Are we close to it? Who knows? Only the history books will know what actually happens here. But I tell you what, man, I think we're getting damn near close to World War III.
Yeah, it's interesting to sit and contemplate that there's a set of circumstances here where we could find ourselves in a shooting war in Europe, a shooting war in the Middle East, and a civil war in the United States all at the same time.
And a shooting war in Asia with China and the Philippines, or China and Australia, or China and Taiwan. Take your pick.
Yeah, I think if we get tangled up in the Middle East and the Ukraine, I think Taiwan's sunk. Mm-hmm. And the Philippines, I mean, what will save the Philippines is what's always saved the Philippines, is just so big and so diverse.
Yeah.
But I would be unsurprised to see them take Taiwan and then turn their sights on Luzon.
Yeah. Having spent months in the Filipino jungles myself, I can tell you it's tough terrain, man. Tough.
And how many islands are we talking about? We've talked about it before, 3,500, something crazy like that.
Thousands.
Yeah. How do you take that whole place?
It depends on the tide, the number of islands, right? I mean, seriously.
Also true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also true.
So let's talk about NATO encroachment, man, as far as one of them. Take a look at this map, guys. You'll see the countries that are extremely dark have been around since 1940s, 1950s. But look at what happens as we move closer to Russia. These are the NATO members that are coming in. And this is one of the things that it's a legitimate concern for Putin. And it's a legitimate gripe that, hey, man, look, you said you wouldn't encroach on me. And yet look at this. New member states coming in all the time. They just let in Sweden. Finland looks, they're letting in Sweden. Finland just got in. And then you have, current aspiring members. You got, what is that? Ukraine. You've got Georgia down there. I mean, what do you make of this?
Well, of course, we see it through our perspective, right? And we've all been raised on, the encroachment of communism. They're coming after us. They're sneaking in. They're shooting at us. We tend to forget that Russia has a perspective. And the whole reason the Russians created the Iron Curtain was so that they wouldn't have another Operation Barbarossa, right? So they wouldn't have another invasion into that started on Russian soil. And the war was spent years fought on Russian soil. So from their perspective, this is just a slow roll of the German expansion into their territories. And couple that with Putin, who, is a dyed-in-the-wool, unrepentant Cold Warrior. His dad, as we talked about on the show previously, his dad was a cook for Stalin. I mean, he grew up with these people, the great Russian Empire. So from their perspective as a nation and Putin's perspective individually, this is absolutely a slow death, a slow encroachment. And he wants to put the band back together anyhow. So we're giving him that casus belli. If he's got a neutral Sweden and a neutral Finland on his border, and a few other neutral nations on his border, that's easier for him to live with, or people that he influences, than it is for NATO forces to be on his border. Mm-hmm. Because now he's got a situation where you could have German tanks on the Polish border in 2024.
Would we want Warsaw Pact countries? We would want Canada to join the Warsaw Pact or whatever? Hell no.
How would we have felt if Cuba, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic all joined the Warsaw Pact? Yeah. So I get it. I understand his perspective.
Doesn't mean as an American we agree with it, but I wanted to put the slack, because when you look at it in terms of when they came aboard, you go, oh shit. And Michael Gentile brings up the excellent point. Isn't that the deal we offered to get their nukes out after the wall fell? Was no satellite states would go into NATO?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what we said.
Yes, and we reneged on that, obviously. Sorry.
It was a different president. It was a different Congress.
My bad. So that I wanted to talk about NATO encroachment is one of the things that drove perhaps Russia to push into the Ukraine. One of the many reasons, if you ask Putin why he did what he did. And of course, the war in Ukraine. Today is number 711. Let me say that again. Today is number 711 of Russia's invasion into Europe. And what have we gotten into? This is 2024, and we've got bloody fighting in trenches that looks just like the Somme in 1915 or what have you. What do you make of that?
So how do you break that? Well, it's true, but how do you break that stalemate? Well, I know how they broke it in World War I. Gas and tanks.
Right.
Let's hope it doesn't go that route this time around. But this can't go on forever.
Well, you know what it is now? It's drones. I mean,
Sure.
the drone war is just terrifying. You see these poor, starving, crying Soviets that are pleading with a little hovering machine that's about to detonate a bomb in their face.
Yeah.
It's awful. If you haven't watched some of this, I encourage you to watch it. These and I love Trump. Whatever you think about the 45th president, I love his point about I want to stop the dying. I don't want to see Russian people getting killed. I don't want to see these. Whatever you think about Putin, it's not the Russian soldier who's doing what he's supposed to be doing.
It's not Putin out there on the front lines dying.
Hell no. Good morning. Gregory is on. Semper Fi, brother. Glad to have you on. He's coin number 1928. So, recently the Ukrainians sunk a Russian
Moscow, right?
Yeah. With sea drones. I didn't even know that was a thing until I read it. I'm like, what the hell is a sea drone? It's what you think. It's flying right over the water. It's not flying like a hypersonic weapon or anything even close. It's cruising right up there and then detonating and blowing a gaping hole in the ship. I mean, this is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, how long until, and I'm sure they already have, is a drone meets a torpedo?
Oh, yeah.
Right? So now you've got a 2,000-pound RDX missile that flies underwater.
Yeah. So again, these are the maps, and I throw this up here because 711 days, man. If you would have asked me where is this going to be over in 7 days, I'd have said, hey, Russia will roll this thing up in a week or so.
Yep.
And yet here we are. Look at this. After 711 days and billions and billions and billions of American dollars, they've been able to hold the line pretty well. But how much longer can they do that, Dr. Fuller?
Yeah, and I don't know that they would have held out this long if it wasn't for the influx of NATO weaponry.
Oh, no.
But it's really revealing the Russians to be a glass tiger with nuclear weapons. They just
unpack that, will you, Dr. Fuller?
Well, they're just all of us predicted the Russians were going to roll over the Ukrainians. I mean, you weren't alone. I said the same thing, like, oh, those Ukrainians are screwed.
Yeah.
Because we had this idea in our head of the Russian bear, right, from 1985, right? And the reality is, it's a conscript army. They don't have the moral high ground here, and they can't keep a lid on the information war, right? They can come out and say, oh, it's Nazis are running Ukraine. We got to stop that. Well, that may fly initially, but as soon as people start doing a little bit of research and wondering, hey, is that true? They're going to figure out pretty quickly, as they have, that's not true. Right. And you just don't see the morale of the Russian troops, And what is it that Napoleon said? The morale is to the physical is 3 is to 1. These guys, their heart isn't in it.
Nope.
And as we've discussed before, I think that would be different if the Ukrainians had invested Moscow, right? I mean, if they invade Mother Russia, that probably will change very quickly.
And if you go on, you'll never see this on American mainstream media, but go and watch the poor wives of these conscripted soldiers that are just pouring into the streets in Moscow. It is heart-wrenching stuff. So I don't see an end anytime soon. I mean, if one party gets elected next year, then we may see some sort of negotiated settlement. I don't know.
What happens in Russia? Let's say this goes on for 5 years and doesn't end in a publicly approved of fashion. The public is upset about this. Now you've got soldiers with 5, 6, 7 years of combat time coming home. And now they're civilians and their kids are getting drafted. How does that play out?
All right.
You've got a bunch of, we've got the same thing. We've got 20 years of combat veterans roaming around our country. Probably best to make sure we don't overly piss them off.
Yeah.
As a government, but not our government, by God. Challenge accepted.
Yeah, exactly.
How does that end for Russia? I don't know.
I don't know either, man. It's, I don't know. And now, during the last 6 months or so, the Ukraine has launched some missile attacks into Russia proper. So let's see how.
Let's see happen.
Yeah, let's see how that plays out. Then you got the war in Gaza. Of course, this is a World War III update. Are we there? Are we not there? I don't know. It'll be interesting to read the books in the future. But war in Gaza so far, as of yesterday, claimed 27,365 people and wounded another 66,000. And again, this is something, guys, that in October the 6th of last year, a few months ago, if we would have thought about this on the show, we'd be like, "Nah, this is not going to happen," and yet here we are.
Yeah, and it's important to note that the vast majority of those casualties are Gazans, the Palestinians. The Israelis are giving far better than they're getting at this point. And again, they're pissed, and nobody should be surprised. And it's not just October's attack. It's years, decades of this kind of garbage coming from the Palestinians, and they spank them and they tell them, knock it off. The Palestinian says, oh yeah, we're sorry. And then they do it again and again and again. And, so whether or not you agree with the direction Israel has chosen to go, you should at least be able to understand why the Israelis have chosen to go this route.
Dr. Fuller, don't you think that this administration thought they would have a better control on Netanyahu and could kind of
but I don't know why
he has just been like, hey, I'm going, check me out.
Well, you have a sizable chunk of the controlling party in Congress that are anti-Israeli and have been making anti-Israeli noise for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's going to equate to less influence in Israel. Right? I mean, you're willing to let the Iranians have nukes? And you think the Israelis are going to be your chummy with that?
Not a chance.
Come on. Who's surprised? Again, whether you agree with them or not is less material than whether or not you understand what they're doing. And that's the important thing. Understand what they're doing. And I get it. I mean, I've lived over there, and I'd be the first to tell you, the Israelis treat the Palestinians like crap.
Yeah.
And just, the police interactions I saw, or just Israeli civilians interactions I saw, you think that the old American South was bad in black-white relations. The Israeli-Palestinian relations are horrible. And, there's an argument to be made that the Palestinians bring it on themselves.
Well, the good thing is that Egypt and Jordan have stepped up and said, we'll take some of these Palestinians. Oh, wait a minute. No, they've been very clear. They will not take a single one. What was it? The president of Egypt said, I will take exactly 0 or worse to that effect.
Yeah. And everybody should understand, as we've talked about several times on your show, that nobody wants them. And the Jordanians have had them for 70 years. They aren't letting them become citizens. There's no path to citizenship for a Palestinian in Jordan.
Nope.
It's just not going to happen. And you got to ask scratch your head and ask yourself why. Why would they treat their fellow Arabs with this whole concept, this westernized idea of a pan-Arab love fest is just garbage.
Yeah.
It's absolute garbage. That's what makes Saladin an even more important historical figure in my mind. Because he was able to, by hook, by crook, by lead or by gold, he got everybody on board. It's a remarkable feat, and it hasn't been repeated since.
Yes, exactly. And followed the Pablo Escobar mold of, Las Plumas, Las Platas.
That's it. Those are your choices, boys.
Silver or lead. What do you want? Johnny King says, I think you only need to factor in the countries that can affect a major change with nuclear weapons. If that's the case, then yes, we are in a world war. A war in the Middle East, as it has escalated and spilled outside the borders, we have 3 Americans killed and shipping lanes shut down, over 160 attacks, whether that's on America or our interest or the shipping lanes, etc. And it was just a matter of time, right, Dr. Fuller, before Americans were killed. It was just a matter of time. Force protection measures can only do so much. And what I fear next is going to be the sinking of one of our ships. What do you think, sir?
Well, they'd be hard pressed to do it, but it's certainly on the table.
Yeah.
Sinking a U.S. vessel, you've spent more time afloat than I have, is no small feat.
No, but the Sea Whiz gun can only do so much.
Right.
At some point, and it can get overwhelmed, just like the Iron Dome was, right?
Something goes wrong, and it only takes one, right? We have to be lucky every time. They only have to be lucky once. But, just putting a hole in the side of a U.S. cruiser is going to establish the fact.
Like the Cole, right?
Yeah.
My God. Cole, the attack on the Cole was a couple of, scumbags on a little ship with a shaped charge, and bang, and killed 17 sailors, injured 50 something.
Yeah. But what I found really amazing about those, they put that boat on a boat and brought it home.
Mm-hmm.
That's wild. It didn't, the Cole didn't sail home. They put it on another America, right? We put it on another boat and sailed it home. But we're just not going to put up with it. And the fact that we've put up with as much as we have so far is, I think, a testament to our restraint. But at some point, you're right. One of those things is going to hit. It's going to kill some people. If it sinks a boat, oh fuck.
Well, the good news is that the Arabs in the Middle East and those that live there, they really appreciate restraint. Dr. Fuller, hell no.
Historically speaking,
Historically speaking,
they've
they
had
do
nothing but
not.
respect for restraint.
Restraint means nothing. It's that whole portion of the world only understands one thing, and I hate to put it as bluntly as that, but that is the case, man. Nuclear risk, Dr. Fuller. Let's talk about this. The U.S. Is putting nukes back on UK soil. I'm sure you saw that.
It did.
Much you do about nothing, or are they preparing for something?
Well, I mean, it sends a message. The Brits have nukes. They have plenty of nukes of their own, right. And our nukes can go everywhere between our sea-based, air-based, and land-based. So putting them in England is a gesture,
right?
Right. It's designed to send a message.
Yeah.
And just like Putin said, hey, we've got nukes. All behave yourselves over there. Well, this is us saying the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And not something that I would have attributed. It's not a tool I would have thought the Biden administration would have pulled out of their toolbox.
We none of us on this show this morning knows who's really running the show as far as the Biden administration is concerned. But I want to speak to something. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was a point at which I think it was McNamara was the Secretary of Defense, and he was in the war room, and one of the admirals made a very provocative move with one of our ships as we were had the ring around Cuba, and the way it's told to me, McNamara was like, "What in the hell are you doing? You're outside your scope." And he's like, "Hey, look, calm down, sir. The Navy's been running blockades for centuries. We got this." He's like, "This is not a blockade. This is language. This is speech. The president is speaking to the Kremlin right now with what we're doing." And I think that's exactly the point you're making, is it not?
It is. It's very well put. This is diplomatic speech. And of course, military folks are trained, hired, and promoted to think a certain way. And I can see where he's like, look, this is a blockade. We're not diplomats. You should never mistake the military for a diplomatic corps. They are a element of diplomacy that are employed by others who speak that language. Putting nukes in England is speaking that language.
Yeah. And oh, by the way, the UK is testing their missiles, their long-range missiles. And again, I think that's language as well. So that's another piece of the puzzle. Now, you'll see there's a lot I have to say about China versus Taiwan, China versus Japan, China versus the Philippines, China versus India. We've got economic considerations at play. We've got a military buildup, unprecedented military buildup going on, and we'll take a look at the map on that here in just a minute. Stockpiling of resources to avoid U.S. sanctions and things of this nature. You've got, and again, when we think about what has led to international conflict since 1945, 85% of the time it's been over territorial claims. And I say that because that's exactly what the Taiwan situation is. Is it the most simplest thing? It's a territorial claim. And if you look at what Xi said, he warned General Mattis when he was Secretary of Defense. He said, quote, "We cannot lose even 1 inch of the territory left behind by our ancestors," end quote. And that again, that's
a hell of a thing to say coming from the Chinese. I mean, Liechtenstein says that. I get it. They can't afford to lose an inch. If any country on the planet can afford to lose an inch or two here or there, probably China. But again, I understand his point. I understand his perspective. His job isn't to look out for the best interests of the Philippines or India or America. His job is to look out for the best interests, as he sees them, of the Chinese.
Right. So, Xi has attached his legitimacy as well as his legacy to making China a superpower. State media now declares that under Mao, China stood up. Under Deng, China grew rich, and under Xi, China will become mighty. In recent years, Xi has given internal speeches instructing the Chinese military to be ready for war and the Chinese people to prepare for, quote, extreme scenarios. So, Dr. Fuller, let's take a look at the Chinese military spending relative to ours since 1990. So on the right, you have the Chinese military budget since 1990. And then you see ours on the left, and you'll see I've also included a graph for relative to GDP because that's the way here and we think in our economy. And there you go.
Yeah, well, of course, with the Chinese, these numbers are all best guess. I think it's important that we put that out.
Right.
Because the Chinese are
They don't release stuff like that, but
They're renowned for playing rather fast and loose with the numbers. So yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult to argue that the Chinese haven't been building up their military over the last decade or two. And again, as I mentioned before on here, the Marine Corps has come out and said, look, we're prepping to get into a shooting war with the Chinese in the next 10 years. They said that 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So that clock's ticking. And the Chinese would be foolish not to think in those same terms. And they have land disputes currently with how many different countries?
Well, that's why I include, Philippines and India.
And I think
the
India
new map Beijing put out had pieces of India and Nepal, and that are, there's slivers, but
right. But I mean, if they're going to say we can't give up an inch, what makes you think that the countries involved aren't going to have the same perspective?
Right.
And I think India is really an underappreciated player in this game. I think perhaps those that are in the game more full time than you and I consider India more often than you and I do. But the Indians, I mean, it's the most populous country in the world. They're running out of space.
And nuclear armed. And they're running out of space, as in they've got nothing but the ocean around them. So they got nowhere to go. They got the Himalayas.
So there's a food issue. There's a water issue. There's an expansion issue. They're not trying to limit their population.
Nope.
Well, to me, that means Bangladesh and Pakistan better be ready. And the Chinese. I mean, because, Bangladesh kind of small. Pakistan kind of small. China kind of big. It's just a matter of time until they bump heads, in my mind. Hopefully they have the common courtesy to do it after I've died. So it's not my problem, but it's coming. I just don't see us getting out of this century without the Chinese and the Indians going at each other.
I don't either.
I think it's a practical reality that the Indians are just going to have to deal with.
Yeah.
And, for food, my God, feeding their population is going to be problematic. And I have several Indian neighbors, anecdotally speaking, who have immigrated here from India. And, they're very technical people. They seem to be all IT people in my neighborhood. Mm-hmm. No love for the Chinese.
Nope.
None whatsoever. I mean, I've talked to them more about the Chinese than the Pakistanis. They don't mention the Pakistanis very often at all, but they are very clear in their dislike for India or for China amongst the Indians. So that's just one little neighborhood and one little place in South Carolina. But, it's food for thought.
Yeah, it is. And Michael Gentili says, anybody following what the Chinese are doing in the Darien Gap? The Darien Gap, if I'm not mistaken, is part of the peninsula down there in Panama. Very remote, very mountainous, dense jungle, but it is a major player right now in immigration. And what's interesting is there's a Brett Weinstein was on Tucker Carlson recently, and I haven't watched the entire interview, but he went down to the Darien Gap, and it was pretty eye opening. So let's put a pin on that. Maybe I'll come back and talk more about that next Monday as I get more schooled up on it. But it is a very, very interesting place in the world. And one of the things that it was interesting about Brett Weinstein, he came back with some images of it. There's huge, huge, huge camps of Chinese down there. What they're doing, I don't know, but they wouldn't let him and his cameras in there. So the pictures that he brought back were taken surreptitiously. And the other thing is, what was shocking to me is a lot of these migrant camps along the way have American flags on them. Like, this is funded by America. Like, what the hell are we doing?
Here, let me buy you a knife and present it to you so you can slit my throat.
All right. Chad says the Tucker interview on the Darien Gap was very eye-opening. Yeah, I'll have to go back and finish watching that. But the last thing I want to talk about is North Korea missile tests and saber rattling. But I think that goes back to what Johnny King was saying with regard to nukes. It's something that you can do now that you're a nuclear player is threatened. Hey, don't forget about me.
Yeah, and that's kind of his thing. There are apparently problems with having generational tyrants in charge of nation states, and we're seeing it play out. They're a wild card on the world stage. They really are, and they probably punch above their weight now that they have nukes. How do they land? How do they sugar out and all this? How do the Chinese use them as a client state to cause a problem, like the Iranians are using the Houthis? That's a age-old diplomatic tool.
And I recently read, probably in the last 4 or 5 months, The Coldest Winter about the Korean War. It was interesting. If you do nothing more than just read the first chapter or two on the run up to that, how um, I forget who the leader of North Korea was at the time. He, was shuttling back and forth, trying, hey, Stalin, can I go? Can I go? Hey, Mao, can I go? Can I go? You gonna be okay? And it's a tacit, I don't know. I mean,
Who cares? It's Korea. What could
and then
happen?
it's like, all right, here they
It's
go.
like Wisconsin, right?
Exactly. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about my red line points update. So we're up to 7 right now. And this is just internal. If you look at the Black Swan events, whether that's Israel invasion by Hamas, Israel-backed, Iranian-backed groups attacking shipping and American allies, killing, that doesn't really play into a lot of internal stuff. It's all the other stuff. 45th president being disqualified from state ballots, extreme MAGA Republican stuff, gag orders on the president, judges refusing to let him attend his wife's mother's funeral. I mean, things of this nature that just are incredible breaches of what we've normally had in the States United. And this is the one that scares the shit out of me. And that is the border crisis. Texas failing to comply with SCOTUS and POTUS. And could we see bank accounts frozen? I mean, what happens if they freeze Governor Abbott's bank account, for example, or his attorney general, Paxton, or some of the others, or, the 14 governors that showed up? I mean,
or they just cut off federal aid to those states.
Exactly.
Just, turn off the federal faucet. A lot of states are dependent on federal monies. Now, where does the federal government get that? From the citizens of these states, from the companies of these states. But yeah, the state budgets depend on this. Mm-hmm. So what happens when that gets turned off? Frankly, the only reason I thought that you weren't leaving the country on your extended vacation based on this when you went to Scotland was the fact that you told everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
That was the only reason I was like, okay, he's probably coming back. but yeah, we're getting dangerously close to that red line cutoff event. And, just like we were talking about in the Middle East and in Europe, if we've got opposing forces on the border, federal and state, and their military units on the border like that, that's just a formula for problems, right? Yeah. The potential problems get really big. And what happens if Biden administration personnel decide we're going to go ahead and federalize these units, or we're going to order them as the commander in chief, I'm going to order them to do something, or it becomes sort of that legal wrangling over who's in charge of these military units. Now are we in a situation where the individual battalion and brigade commanders are making decisions as to whose orders to follow?
Yeah.
That doesn't bode well for us. And I know that the laws are written in such a way that, the federal government can't necessarily just take over. But what if they decide, I'm going to put the 101st Airborne down there on the border while there are National Guard troops there. So now you've got some taking orders from the president and some taking orders from the governor. If you'd played that scenario out for me 2 years ago, I'd have said you were, smoking crack and you should be wearing Will Wood's tinfoil hat.
Yeah.
But now it seems plausible. Hey, we're going to put a Marine Expeditionary Force in at Corpus Christi, and they're going to take over border control for the first 10 miles, from the coast of the first 10 miles. And then they just start letting people in, right? Well, how's Texas going to respond to that? I don't know.
Well, and I'll give you another scenario since we're doing a little bit of what if, and I'm glad we are, because this is kind of where I wanted to. This is the final slide, guys. But is one of my thoughts is they go to arrest Greg Abbott or something like that, or there's a Lexington and Concord thing where they're going to seize the armory there that's supporting the ops at Eagle Pass, right? This is Lexington and Concord. This is the same thing. British troops came in. They were going to get the gunpowder that the colonial militias had just to kind of make sure they couldn't use it against British troops. And 77 colonists started shooting at them. So if you try to do that, like, look, we're not going to federalize, but we're just going to lock down the armory. We're going to federalize the armory so you can't get your weapons, because those that haven't been in the military, there's a thing called an ordnance custody card that you got to present to the armorer in order to get the weapon. Well, if I seize the armory, then you can't get your weapons, and thus I've defanged the snake. I'm just playing what if games, Dr. Fuller.
Sure.
And then you could have something like that. And of course, right. Tony brings up the point of posse comitatus, but they can and have gotten around that before. So God, look what Lincoln did to the Constitution.
Right. I mean, that only applies if they have these guys out enforcing the laws, or they contemplate enforcing laws. And the difference between Lexington and now, of course, for consideration, is you're talking about moving on National Guard troops versus, a bunch of guys grabbing their muskets off their mantelpieces. And, right. The National Guard of today is not like the National Guard of when I was in, 25, 30 years ago. These are combat veterans. I mean, most of our National Guard units have guys who have multiple deployments to combat zones. So now you're going to put combat experienced American soldiers bumping into combat experienced American soldiers.
Well, and again, I would submit that many of the 77 militiamen that were there had also fought during the French and Indian Wars.
Yeah.
Just as Francis Marion had, the swamp fox who Mel Gibson portrays in the movie The Patriot. So, and that's where George Washington earned his stripes. Yeah. So I think it could cut both ways. And all it takes is one shot, the shot heard around the world. And again, what did we see the Crown do? Punitive raids up and down the coast following something like that. So,
and who fired the shot that heard around the world? To this day, nobody knows.
To this day, nobody knows.
This very day.
Nope. And we'll never know at this point.
So let's hope and pray we don't get on that road. I like you, I'm a little concerned that we are putting our feet on that road, and nothing good comes of that for anybody.
No, because most of the, a good percentage of the men that signed the Declaration of Independence were either financially ruined or, imprisoned. And as we'll see next week when I discuss, some of the causes of the Civil War, kind of how that played out, just to give you a down and dirty, we'll talk about the causes next week, but we'll also talk about some of the atrocities that have kind of been swept over because they're not nice to talk about at the dinner table. But it goes nowhere good. Dr. Fuller, I've kept you on here almost 2 hours, or an hour and 45 minutes. Thank you so much for being on this morning, man. And
thanks for having me, Rich. Thanks for
any closing remarks, closing thoughts?
Again, you got to be an informed consumer of what's going on. So pay attention. It's just like you have situational awareness when you go to the gas station, you go to the grocery store. You need to have situational awareness in what's going on in this country. And I personally hate watching the news. I just feel like now I have to pay attention and be ready, right? Because the fight's coming.
Yeah, that's a perfect place to stop the show. If you want to get copies of Dr. Fuller's books, I got links for you in today's show notes. Guile says, great show. Thank you. Gregory says, great show, Simplify. Mark says, thank you. Very educational show. Always a pleasure to get to sit down with you, Dr. Fuller. Thank you again, sir.
My pleasure, Rich. And I really wish all the best for you and the audience.
All right, guys. Stay safe out there. And thanks for being on today's show. Remember to keep liking, sharing. We'll see you again Monday morning.